you check the children? Show a little mad sometimes.
Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
Sometimes. That is better.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Long days and pleasant nights, fellow travelers along the path of the beam. I am known on this level of the tower as Jaime and Fuego.
I'm Cecil Laird.
And if you please, you join us here for some further palaver on Hail to Stephen King. Not trying to bust your eardrums, peeps, but we are continuing our tier ranking coverage, this being the third installment, and this was an idea that none other than the showrunner, Mr. Cecil Laird, came up with, so hope y'all have been digging so far. You've been along with me for this, learning a little bit, right?
Yeah, a little bit, yep, and doing the technical side for you, so I'll be mostly quiet for this, but yeah, I'll be here to bounce off you if necessary, but
sweet.
We're moving on to the next decade.
Indeedsy. So for the first one, we did 74 to 83. In turn, in our second installment, we did 84 to 93. And so now we are covering the next 10 years of King's published career. We are going to be finishing up the 90s and going into the next millennium for 2003. So the first one is one of the very few King things that has never been adapted. And in all honesty, I can kind of see why, because it is a very heavy Dark Tower tie-in book with some of the stuff that we get later on. But really, as far as the tale of Ralph Roberts, this older man who loses his wife, and then he slowly just segues into insomnia in the midst of his depression, and then starts a psychedelic aspect comes in because that sleep deprivation makes him start seeing stuff, and it's a very strange book. It's definitely very lengthy. It's one of those King tomes that could be like a door stopper, sort of situation. But I think it's off-putting, at least for adaptation, because of the fact that there is so much that if you're not familiar with the Dark Tower and with the Gunslinger and in turn the Crimson King, who is introduced here in this, there's a lot that'll go over people's heads. The first time I read this book was immediately after my first time reading it. So we're talking, that was like 10, 15 years ago. So I was like, oh, this book also takes place in Derry? I gotta read this book. And like Hanlon shows up, and you have a couple references to like a residual evil still being there. But really, it's a book that can be kind of confusing with some of the stuff that happens later on in it, but I don't know, the stuff with the weird little bald doctors that Ralph starts seeing, and the discussion of alternate dimensions, and just the whole trippy aspect of the storytelling. Ralph is a great protagonist, and just the thing is that it also deals with abortion protest and a lot of mid-90s politics that I know were just very meaningful to Cy King, but there's just too much going on in this book. It's a little bloated. It's got too many moving pieces. They don't always compellingly correlate. And while I would love to see this turned into a TV series and maybe just scale back on the Tower connections, kind of like what they did with Hearts in Atlantis, because that book actually has Tower stuff tied in with who the Low Men actually are, but they just pulled that stuff out, and it was still a very compelling story. I feel like Ralph Roberts' story of just segueing into Insomnia could be done very well as either a movie or as a show, but there's no development for it yet, so this is one that I am actually, begrudgingly to a lot of people, it's not quite it's one that I might put in the D territory, honestly, because it's definitely a world builder, that's for sure, and I know there's some people who really dig this book. It's C-D+ territory, but yeah, I gotta put it as a D, unfortunately. It's one that King himself has gone on record as well to say that it's one where he was trying too hard. It's a book where he was forcing his hand, he had trouble coming up with certain ideas, and he feels like he kind of Frankensteined it as opposed to just letting the writing flow, which is what he prefers to do and what he contends that he doesn't outline stories. He just lets stuff roll and flow and go, and he said he had to kind of force this book into creation at various times, and so that's why, yeah, it's definitely, it's in the back of his work, at least for me, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next up is Rose Madder.
Another one of the few that has not been adapted. Crazy how we're going 2 for 2 in a row at this point of stuff that has not been made into a television series or a movie or anything of that nature. But this is one that I think, especially based on the compelling aspect of a woman rising up in an abusive relationship and actually running away, going out on her own, trying to escape an abusive police officer of a husband. This is one that I feel like a lot of people would rally behind, and not to get current or political or anything, but in the Time's Up Me Too movement, I feel like this is the type of story that would be very compelling for a lot of not just women, but people in general of either gender across the world, and yet it still hasn't happened, and it's once again King writing from a female perspective, and so that's why this one is going to go right there with Dolores and with Gerald's Game. It's one that I think people, if they actually discovered it, would be a little more impressed with than they would actually realize. And when I was doing all of my Goodwill collecting and savers and going to different thrift shops and stuff like that, trying to amass all of my hardcovers, Rose Madder was one that I saw more often than not in those shelves of all of those different places, obtainable for very, very cheap, everybody. So with just a little bit of hunting, or with jumping on Amazon, Marketplace or eBay or something, you could probably find it for a very reasonable price. There's a little bit of supernatural presence with this painting that she buys and jumping into Midworld, but it's very, very... It's not as heavy-handed as you get in Insomnia, which is why I put this above that. And really, at its core, it's a very compelling story about a woman trying to escape this real-life monster in her husband. And so it's one that I dig. It's one that I dig, and it needs to be discovered by more people. So,
all right. Next up is hang on, I think I just had it. Yeah, next one is The Green Mile.
Green Mile. Adapted awesomely by Frank Darabont, his follow-up after doing none other than The Shawshank Redemption and Rita Hayworth, which was considered by many people to be one of the greatest American films of all time. So unfortunately, The Green Mile is a little bit in its shadow to a degree, but this is a book that I adore. It's compelling. It was originally serialized and published in a bunch of different little mini books, and I have those, and then it was later collected as a hardcover. The Darabont film might be a little better because it trims some of the fat, and the character of Coffee is just one that you sympathize with in such a sincere, significant fashion, and this is where it's supernatural, but it's not so much a horror film of sorts, or book either. Really, the most villainous people are some of the guards at this prison where Coffee has been accused of murdering 2 little girls, and it's harrowing and horrifying in that regard, and it's interesting to find out who actually did it, the interactions with him and our lead, who the name of the character Tom Hanks portrayed is eluding me at this particular point, unfortunately, but their relationship is it's very sweet, and it's heartwarming, and it's sad, and this is... Oh boy, I struggle between an A and a B for The Green Mile, but I think I'd put it up there as an A in all honesty, because it's probably more so because of the adaptation and just the fact that was even better. This could be a B plus, but it's an A minus for me. I think it is just a little bit above, because it is just one of those just sad and bittersweet King stories that tugs on the feels like a mofo. And are you a fan of the film, at least?
Yeah. Oh, I love the film. Yeah. No, I was just thinking when we get to the movies, I'm like S.
Yeah, it's up there. Both of them. All 3 of Darabont's films, as we will get into,
for real, yeah,
are an S for me.
I'm thinking, there might be more Stephen King adaptations that are S's that are non-horror than Stephen King horror S adaptations.
Yeah, it's where he's got most of his esteem. It's where people realized, okay, he doesn't just write
Never seen Stand
stories.
By Me. I need to watch that by the time we do that.
Stand By Me is terrific. That one will really get you. Rob Reiner at his finest. So yeah, The Green Mile, I contend that is definitely an A, and it needs to be more well known, because I feel like it's in the shadow of Shawshank sometimes. So
next one is these 2 I remember coming out because
same day, they're twinners.
Yeah, I worked at the mall at the time, and I was right next to a bookstore.
It's either 95 or 96 that this came out. I'm trying to remember.
Well, maybe I didn't work at the mall just yet, but I remember going into Brentano's at Fashion Square and these being prominently displayed. So,
yeah,
first up.
Yeah, Desperation. The cool thing about this and the Regulators is that the cover art, the wraparound to the hardcovers actually connect with each other and form one big, huge piece of art, which is really, really dope. But yeah, this was King diverting a little bit, not setting a story in his typical Maine. Takes place in Nevada. And have you seen the McGarris adaptation?
No.
Yeah, it was a late 90s, early 2000s.
That's right. I pulled that poster
series.
and I was like, it's got the sheriff on the cover that's largely in shadow.
Yeah, who was portrayed by none other than Hellboy himself.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, whose name is eluding me right now.
Yeah, me too. I wish I could think of it too.
Ah, damn it! Everybody's gonna rename
Ron
Perlman.
Got it.
Yeah. Yes, you saved me, son. You saved us from ridicule there. But yeah, the adaptation is faithful enough, but it doesn't hit the hard-hitting, R-rated, just nastiness of this book. Some would even contend this is a little more along the lines of a Bachman book in some of the mean-spirited stuff that goes down. I mean, it starts out with this couple driving through Nevada, and they get pulled over by a mysterious sheriff who basically plants drugs on them, takes them back to the cell of this tiny little dingy place called Desperation, Nevada, and it's such a frightening scenario that they find themselves in, and it doesn't go very well without spoiling stuff. But then you also have a writer who is doing a cross-country motorcycle ride. Interestingly enough, Stephen King is a notorious motorcycle rider, and when he was on the book tour for this release, he actually did the book tour on his motorcycle and went cross-country, just like the author in this story is doing. There's also a handler assistant who is following him in a vehicle and basically becomes our main character, along with this ensemble of people who have also been taken in by this mysterious sheriff. And there is a entity that's along the lines of Pennywise or Dandelo or whatever it's
Dandelo,
called.
what's that from?
That is from the Seventh Dark Tower book, but just one of these. It's called Tak, T-A-K, and it's this big, mysterious, other dimensional presence that is jumping from body to body, and it starts out in our sheriff, and it goes into a few other people, and you basically find out as the story goes on how this evil presence was unearthed, and traces all the way back to some migrant Chinese workers that were in this mine. It's a very, very nuanced, interesting story, and there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of compelling characters. You actually have Cynthia Smith, I believe her name is. She's this punk rocker chick who is actually in Rose Matter at this group home that our Rose, our abused woman. Cynthia was a minor character in Rose Matter, and then she pops up in this book as like kind of a lead character. So it's kind of King maintaining his continuity and bringing characters from one book and expanding their role in another. So Desperation is very cool, and for me, it's a solid B. It's one that it's not A level, although I would imagine there's some that contend it is. There's a lot of devout fans of Desperation. It's solid B, maybe B plus for me. In some ways, though, our next entry, the corresponding Bachman book, this book is bonkers, man, and it is King at his most creatively crazy. And this one, it's probably it can't ascend to an A level, but it's definitely not a C, and it is so drastically different as the Twinner. The Regulators basically has a lot of the same characters from Desperation, including Cynthia, including our writer, and all of them, but as opposed to taking place in Nevada, it takes place in an alternate dimension of Ohio. And so characters that live in Desperation, some of them die in the Regulators, and vice versa. We have different heroes, but it really all boils down to this suburb in Ohio where this young gifted boy is basically bringing into existence these imaginary creatures and characters from a TV show that he is fond of called Moto Cops. And then there's also a Western vibe, but basically this kid is powerful enough to start turning his Ohio suburb into like this Western with these weird robot murderous cops. And I mean, it's very brutal and very bloody, and a lot of characters die in really nasty, just shot to pieces fashion. And yeah, it's some of the most creative and crazy stuff that King has done, and it was the last time he wrote officially under the Bachman moniker. That was at least until Blaze came out, but Blaze had been written decades before. So this is the last new Bachman book that King had done. I'd have to give a shout out to Rob Corddry, because he is such a fan of both Regulators and Desperation. He constantly sings the praises. I think it's his favorite duo of King books, and this is another that has never been adapted, but you would definitely need to go like either an R-rated film route, or you would need to go like an HBO or a Showtime or a Cinemax or Stars or something, or to a pay channel, a premium network to adapt this property, because it's even more mean-spirited than Desperation in some of the depth of characters and the things that go down, and the fantasy aspect with the kid is really fascinating. And so yes, these two being twinners, I should say, just like Gerald's Game and Dolores Claiborne, these both sit at a very solid B for me. And whereas a lot of people are familiar with Desperation, check out the Regulators if you're familiar with the first story. I mean, you don't really need to read them in either order either. You know, you can read Regulators first, Desperation first. They are interchangeable in that regard. So.
Next one is.
Oh boy! Now we come to it.
I know. I'm pretty sure I know where it's going to end.
You know exactly where this is going, but I can give my little diatribe first and foremost. So I know there's a lot of Tower junkies that think I hold this one in too high regard. They think this one it is the longest of all the Tower books, aside from the finale, the 7th one. It also takes place in 2 time periods, much like what we had with the original book, The Gunslinger. So you've got young Roland, and then you have Roland with his present Ka-Tet of, Eddie Dean and Susanna and Jake and Oi. But this one I love so much because of the flashback stuff, and you're familiar with the flashback stuff having read the comic The Gunslinger Born, with the big coffin hunters and with Susan and all that stuff. So that's what makes up the bulk of this book, is that particular story, and that's really why I love it more so than anything else. You enjoyed that story when we covered it in the visual form.
Absolutely, yeah. It gave context to a lot of stuff that you had been talking about and things like that. So yeah, I definitely liked it. Yeah,
it's a tragic love story. It's definitely Romeo and Juliet in that regard. If anyone like Charyu Tree will haunt me for eternity. But I also love the fact that, we go from Blame the Pain at the end of the Wastelands, and we it's like returning to your program already in progress, just like with, the segue from book 1 to book 2. And I love the tie-ins with the fact that after they get off the train and they're in Topeka, they realize they're in an alternate version of Topeka, Kansas, and they're walking around and they see Nozzle Cola, and they see different brands of vehicles than they'd ever seen, so they know they're not quite in their America. They're somewhere else that's a little bit different, although it has been ravaged by Captain Trips and everybody is dead, so it has the Stand tie-in, and so this book also has Randall Flagg in it. There's just so much of what I love. It's like both of those eras of the Dark Tower just in top form. I adore this book. It's in my top 5 Stephen King books ever. So yes, it is most def an S.
Okay.
Love it.
Next up is Bag of Bones.
Bag of bullshit.
Oh, is this our first F?
This is our first F.
Oh my goodness.
This is our first F. And now granted, everybody, this is F by Stephen King standards, okay? So keep that in mind. There are still bits of this book that I can appreciate. And I know this is one that this is a polarizing book. I have gone on record various times to say it's possibly my least favorite King book, along with another one that I think we do get to on this particular video. So yeah, I guess we're going to get 2 Fs in this video. But nonetheless, Bag of Bones, it's a haunted love story, as it's described, but it's really just relatively boring for me, and it's a writer who loses his wife. She gets run over. It's like a very horrible, sad thing. We have a brief appearance by Ralph Roberts from Insomnia at one particular point, but really he relocates to this lake house where he had done some writing and vacation with his wife. But it's very much, in my opinion, King like living through the eyes of what he wishes he could do, because this older writer gets involved with this younger hotsy-totsy girl who has a very young daughter and has a husband that has passed away. But her father-in-law is this very much like, what's the word I'm looking for? He's almost like a Mr. Burns type, and he is, yeah, exactly. And he's trying to, he manipulates so much in this town, and he is trying to, manipulate and take custody of this granddaughter of his from this woman who he never liked his son marrying to begin with. And a good chunk of the book seriously deals with custody battles and all of this. It's not engaging in any way, shape, or form. That is at least it corresponds, and the B storying is just our writer thinking about having these dreams of this jazz singer and just a nasty thing that went down with a hate crime with regards to her, and so that stuff is at least slightly more compelling. But really, our main villain in this, I do not like, and the main crux of the storytelling, it suffers from the same problems that Insomnia, which I gave a D to, is it's very heavy-handed in some of its politics, and in some, just the subject that King really felt the need to address here. Once again, everybody, this is my personal opinion, and this is me grading Stephen King stuff. This is an F as far as Cy King stuff goes, in my opinion, just because it's, for especially a slightly longer novel, it's not paced very well, it's slow and plodding, and it never really reaches any level of significant excitement. It just never captivated me, really. And yet, I know there's a lot of people who love this book, and as evidenced by the fact that this won the Bram Stoker Award the year that it came out. So there's a lot of fans who, this is really where art is subjective, you know? This, for me, it just did not do it, and it might be my least favorite Cy King book ever. So that's why it gets our first failing grade, because it failed to really engage me in any sort of fashion, unfortunately. So
next up is The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon.
Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. This is a fun little read, you know? It's brisk, it's short, but it's very self-contained. It's really a story about just one girl with a couple other characters that pop up here and there, with that being her family, you know, her mother, her brother, her father is talked about, and a couple flashbacks and stuff. But really, she gets lost in the woods on a little family excursion. Her mother and father are, I forget if they're separated or if they're divorced, but she ends up getting lost, like just walking around in the woods, and then she has to fend for herself for a number of days, and that's really all that there is. And there's a lot of internalized stuff in her head. She is also Tom Gordon, who is a player for the Boston Red Sox. Go figure, Stephen King being the big baseball aficionado that he is. The only thing that she has to get her through a lot of these days of wandering around and trying to find her way back to civilization is putting on her headphones and getting a very low radio frequency of the Red Sox games. And so as she's walking around and trying to, you know, not wipe her butt with poison ivy and just, you know, drink water that makes her sick and throw up and gives her diarrhea and all this nasty stuff. I mean, it's a tough little read, because she's a tough little kid, and she eventually has a kind of creepy creature that is after her at one particular point as the story goes on. It's like trailing her through the woods, but there's also some very interesting flashbacks that we have with her and sitting around with her father as he's having a few beers and she's like having an ice cream or something, if I remember, and they're talking about just the nature of God, and whether God may not be like a person per se, but it is a force that kind of keeps the order of the universe and our planet specifically from destroying itself. He makes the example at one point where he's like, why do you think there haven't been any use of nuclear weapons since, you know, World War II? I'd say that is some sort of, you know, just spiritual presence, you know, keeping us from destroying each other and keeping an order and a balance and a safety and sanctity. So it does wax intellectually about stuff. So there is a little more than just a girl lost in the woods to it. This is definitely a B for me. This is one that I think it needs to be read by more people. They're finally trying to adapt it into a film. At one point, George Romero was attached to direct this, but he passed away. They've in turn found a new writer in I'm Not Okay With This, I believe, was the Netflix program. So the writer of that, she's adapting this, currently working on a new draft of the script. This is one that it is a very solid B for me, and it opens up with one of the best lines of any Stephen King book, and it's that the world has teeth. Excuse me, this is paraphrasing. The world has teeth, and sometimes it bites you. That's, you know, me not saying it word for word, but it's just a very interesting phrase, and that's what happens to our lead little lady in this. So yes, The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. That's definitely one that I dig very much.
Next up is the controversial Dreamcatcher.
Oh boy, Dreamcatcher.
Oh no, is this your other
F?
Is your other F? Oh no.
I know you actually
like this movie.
You like the movie. I don't. The movie is so over the top, ridiculous with the shit weasels and everything. And oh boy, our character of Kurtz, played by Morgan Freeman, is so much more ridiculously over the top than even the one that we get in the book. I mean, this is one where I feel like, you know, King has gone on record very much to say, and I read this after, you know, forming my opinion, But this was the first post-accident book that he wrote, and he wrote it while he was hopped up on painkillers, and he wrote it longhand. So he actually didn't even type, because sitting in his chair and being in his office, while he was recovering from almost dying, was just too painful, and so he wrote it longhand, and he's just not in his regular frame of mind. It was originally titled Cancer. Basically, look in the toilet, you see blood. That's one of the most horrifying things that you can think of. And you would probably say, if I like Tommyknockers so much, why can't you give Dreamcatcher a bit more of a chance? But it felt like he was trying to recreate the camaraderie from it. And there's even some dairy references. Pennywise Lives is something that's mentioned at one particular point in the book. But it felt very much like he was going back to the well to find inspiration, because at this point we already had it. We already had the body. The fact that it's, friends when they were younger and then friends reconvening when they're older. I mean, I do like the character of Beaver. I mean, the stuff with Mr. Gray, the alien that takes over the body of one of the friends. I mean, there's stuff in this book that I like, okay? So just like with Bag of Bones, there's stuff that I appreciate in that book. But for the most part, I feel like this book, despite the intriguing prospect of it and a return to sci-fi and everything, I feel like so much of the execution was just very lackluster. And I rank it low as a King book. So for a King book, it's a fail for me. It's also very, very long. The Lawrence Kasdan film is kind of a mess in my opinion, but it does have, I mean, hey, if you enjoyed it, I know a lot of other people in the Hale group and various other friends that I've talked to, they don't think it's anywhere near as bad as I do, and that's once again, everybody, where art is subjective, and you have to go easy on me here. So yes, this is our second F, and I think it might be the.
Well, don't give it away. We'll see.
Yeah.
Next up is Black House.
So we're getting down to the nitty gritty. The last couple entries here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Black House is the sequel to The Talisman. This is where we find Jack Sawyer again, grown up, as I mentioned a couple videos ago. But yeah, now he is actually I'm trying to remember if he is a private detective or if he is just a police officer. I think, if I recall correctly, decorated officer who was in Los Angeles, and then now he has relocated to. I'm trying to remember where exactly he is back east, because this is one that I have not reread in quite a while. But there are some nasty crimes that have taken place. We're talking murder of children, and there is this particular house that has an emanating evil presence. This is a book that actually ties in with the disappearance of children and ties in directly with the Dark Tower stuff, because we find out that the disappearance of some of these children, they have powers, and we also find out in the 5th Dark Tower entry, which we will be talking about soon, that those children are being used to help break beams that hold up this tower, that is, if it's destroyed, all of time and space and everything, will go into absolute chaos. This is a solid book. It's got some gruesome aspects to it, especially the child murder bits. The detective work is fun. It is a little bit more of a bloated entry, though, so I can't put it anywhere near as high as The Talisman. Just like the controversial opinion of Dr. Sleep being better than The Shining, I have talked to a lot of CRs that think Black House is actually better than The Talisman. It's more of an adult story. The whimsy of The Talisman is definitely not here. This is more of a hard-hitting and brutal exercise. Straub and Stephen King once again teaming for it. But this one is a C for me. It's not been reread since the first go-through of all of these books, because I've read every single Cy King book. I don't know if I have mentioned that in this particular video. I haven't other ones in this tier ranking, but this is one that upon a revisit it might shift up to B, because of the fact that I love the ending to this book. The ending to this book is fantastic, and just there's something to that childhood just nostalgia from The Talisman, which is why I prefer that one and hold it in such higher regard. But Black House is still very good. It's another one that hasn't been adapted, though, so another one of the very few Cy King books. And I think, once again, just like with Insomnia and a few others, it hasn't been adapted because it ties in so directly with the Tower stuff that a lot of the casual audience isn't familiar with. So
okay, so that leads to From Buick 8.
Yay!
Mentioned briefly when we talked about Christine.
Exactly. So From a Buick 8 is another possessed car, so to speak, but this is drastically different than the exercise that we had with Christine. This one is essentially the low men who are emissaries of our Crimson King and just our villains in the Dark Tower series. Imagine if a low man was driving around in a vehicle that was essentially alive, so to speak, and that vehicle was taken into police impound and stayed there for decades, and it just kind of was hidden away in this like lesser used area, this garage of this police station in Pennsylvania. And what sort of havoc could it wreak on people who get curious about it and start kind of looking into it? This is one that actually, it does a lot of time jumping, and it can be a little confusing for people that I've spoken with about it, but this car, like, people try opening it up and getting into the trunk of it, and it just like eats them at times, and it also just has this emanating presence of evil, but yet they also kind of worry these guys who have been at this police station for many decades if it's kind of almost like a linchpin. Like if you were to actually try to destroy or get rid of her or whatever, it would be like pulling the pin of a grenade, and almost like it's holding things together. And so they fear that if they try to actually take it out of the impound, how much more like consequence and havoc could it wreak as opposed to them just leaving it there because of this power that it embodies and stuff. And so it's told with, as I said, lots of flashback, lots of time jumping and stuff, and so that may be a little confusing for some, but I actually think this book is very awesome. They've been trying to adapt it for a while, and it's, once again, it has a new director, and they're trying to do something with it. It was in pre-production before quarantine started. It makes me really wonder how much they would refashion it by trying to make the storytelling a little more linear and stuff. But this is a B for me. This is another one that I think really needs more attention, and along with Rose Madder, it's one that if you go seeking out in the thrift stores and the Goodwills and whatnot and other places where you can find discounted books like this, you typically see a lot of copies of From a Buick 8, and I think it's because it was one of those lesser known, and also it's of that phase of King's career where he was kind of out of the mainstream limelight and approval. I mean, a lot of the adaptations weren't that celebrated at this time, and it was long before the King-assance that we've had here. So yes, it's underread, and I believe it needs more attention. So
all right.
And now
to the next installment.
Yes.
Oh, the Dark Tower.
Exactly. The last good Dark Tower book, everybody. Yes, Wolves of the Calla. So this picks up a little ways after. Well, actually, no. 4.5 comes later. We'll get to that. But at least as far as the book's official of the Dark Tower, because I love Wind Through the Keyhole. That's a definite, very, very solid, awesome book. But Wolves of the Calla is the 5th in the franchise, and this is where we learn more about those breakers that I was talking about that are introduced in the Black House, the Talisman sequel. But our Ka-Tet finds themselves in this new place where kids have basically been being taken for those breaking powers and stuff like that, and they take twins, and when they are brought back, they are Runts, and so they're basically like half mentally retarded and stuff. They're shells of their former selves, and so this has very much a Last Samurai type vibe of our Ka-Tet basically helping this community make a stand against these wolves that come in every X amount of years and steal the children. And yet there is lots of time jumping, world jumping, I should say, back into our world and finding out. And this is where the mythology gets blown up like a mofo. This is where we learn more about this particular lot where this rose is growing that has this corresponding power with the Dark Tower in Midworld, and so that's a big thing. You get introduced to characters like Calvin Tower, who is this guy at this bookstore, who they later form this Tet corporation to actually protect this lot, and this is where this is strictly Tower junkie stuff at this particular point. And there's a lot of moving pieces. It's a very long book, and while I love this book to a point, it kind of loses itself in the third act, in my opinion. When you find out the nature of what these wolves actually are, how do I say this without spoiling? It's kind of like The Village, is what I will say without getting spoilery, and I did not like that twist at all. But it does have a lot of interesting things to say about the nature of storytelling, which is one thing that it veers back to quite a few times. Boy, it would be an A if not for the fact that the third act really kind of falls apart, and I don't like the stuff that they do with Susanna. Especially she has this like other person within her once again, and it just, I don't like those. I don't like that stuff. It doesn't work for me, you know. And you know, the growing chap that's in her that they explore to much more detriment in the next entry. But the fact that 2/3, 3/4 of it, more or less, is really solid. This is a B. You know, it could have been an A if not for the fact that I just don't like the way this book ends, and I really don't like what the series becomes in its next entry. But yeah, that's the thing. Most of Psy King stuff is like 80 to 90%. You know, it's very good. You know, solid storytelling. That's why you're seeing most of the stuff is kind of right there in the center of the rankings.
Well, there tends to be a bell curve with these, so it's in line.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I mean,
with what tier rankings tend to do.
Yeah. So
most people they can't decide on stuff, so they're like, it's
can't
average.
Can't decide. Now, this one is definitely above average. I mean, C is average. I mean, Firestarter, average. Christine, average. Book 2 of Dark Tower, sorry, everybody, average. But and then you've got your below average with, you know, Cujo and Insomnia, and then definitely not so good, Al, with, you know, Bag of Bones and Dreamcatcher. Obviously, everybody, as I've contended constantly throughout this ranking, this is my opinion, and, you know, art is subjective, and if you love Bag of Bones, I mean, if it won a Bram Stoker Award, there's people who love that book. I don't like that book, but, you know, you know, hey, let us know in the comments below, right? You know, what you think and what your ranking of these would be. That sort of interaction, that sort of engagement, it helps our channel a lot, you know, the more you comment and if you stuck around for the entirety of this video, right?
Indeed. So if you guys did so, and if you enjoyed it, click that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ding that notification bell. Switch it to all notifications, that way you don't miss the following episodes. Only 2 more.
YouTube hides things,
unless it depends. Maybe we'll combine the last 2, but we'll probably keep it as 2 separate ones. Yeah. So 5 episodes total. Again, I think we made just about a half hour on this, so I'm enjoying it. I hope you guys are as well. Give Fuego some love. Make sure you go visit his other channel in Fuegotainment as well. He just crossed, as we record this, he crossed 1,000 subs recently. So yeah, let's build that up too. But for now, yeah, I think that's gonna do it. So
that'll do it. Yep. Jaime and Fuego, like Cecil said, all social media sectors for me, and make sure to you know, do the subscribe thing and share this video, tag the horror show, all that jazz. Tons of fun, greatly appreciated. But until the Wheel of Ka comes around once more, hasta luego, cinemigos, constant readers and viewers alike, say thank you, and I am hopeful we share more of this palaver sooner rather than later, and you know the drill. Until next time, stay
scared
and read Stephen King.